The day I felt too busy. Have you ever noticed that the moment life feels heavy, the first sentence you throw into the air is, "I'm busy"? Not, "I'm tired." Not, "I'm scared." Just busy. It sounds productive. It sounds responsible. And it sounds much better than admitting you have no idea what you're doing. This video is about that sentence. About why Americans say, "I'm busy" all the time, and about the day I realized I was using those two words to hide from my own life in the United States. When I first arrived in America, I thought being busy was the goal. Busy meant you belonged. Busy meant you were trying. Busy meant you were becoming someone. Back home, people asked, "Are you okay?" In the US, people asked, "Are you busy?" And if you said yes, they nodded with respect. If you said no, the silence felt awkward, almost suspicious, like you had failed a secret test. I remember one specific morning clearly. It was early fall. The air was crisp in a way I had never felt before. Not cold, not warm, just sharp. I was standing in a small kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that tasted weaker than I expected. My phone buzzed. A message from someone I loved. "Can we talk today?" My heart tightened. Without thinking, my fingers replied, "Sorry, I'm busy." That was a lie. I was not busy. I was afraid. Afraid of my English sounding broken. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of emotions I didn't yet have words for. In that moment, "I'm busy" became a shield. A polite, socially acceptable way to disappear. In American culture, busyness is often worn like a badge of honor. People compare schedules the way athletes compare scars. I worked 60 hours this week. I barely slept. I'm slammed. Underneath the humor, there is pressure. Research in psychology shows that constant busyness can become a form of avoidance. When the brain feels overwhelmed emotionally, it looks for tasks, noise, movement, anything to avoid sitting with discomfort. In simple terms, your mind says, "If I keep moving, I don't have to feel." That was exactly what I was doing. I filled my days with errands, jobs, responsibilities. I told myself I was adapting to American life. But deep down, I was hiding. Every time someone asked how I was really doing, I gave the safest answer possible. Busy. It required no explanation, no vulnerability, no English beyond a single, familiar word. Learning English was supposed to be my priority. I had promised myself I would practice every day. But practice requires exposure. And exposure means mistakes. Mistakes mean embarrassment. So instead of saying, "I don't understand," I said, "I'm busy." Instead of asking questions, I stayed silent. My listening improved, but my speaking stayed frozen, like a muscle afraid to move. There is something interesting about the word busy in English. It sounds active, but it often signals distance. When Americans say, "Let's get coffee sometime," and you reply, "I'm busy," the conversation ends politely. No conflict. No rejection. Just space. I learned this quickly, and I used it too well. Climate played a role I didn't expect. Where I lived, the seasons changed dramatically. Short days. Long nights. Cold weather that pushed people indoors. Studies show that reduced sunlight can increase feelings of isolation and lower motivation. Combine that with cultural distance and a new language, and your world can shrink fast. My apartment became quiet. Too quiet. And in that silence, Being busy felt safer than being alone with my thoughts. The problem is avoidance works in the short term, but it steals from you slowly. Every avoided conversation is a missed chance to practice English. Every "I'm busy" is a door gently closed. I didn't notice it at first. I told myself this was temporary. That one day I would feel confident. One day I would speak freely. One day I would stop being busy. But one day doesn't arrive on its own. The turning point wasn't dramatic. No big argument. No breakdown. Just a simple realization late one night, sitting on the edge of my bed. I had done everything on my to-do list. There was nothing left to complete, fix, or organize. And yet, my chest felt heavy. That's when it hit me. If I was truly busy, I wouldn't feel this empty. Neuroscience explains this well. The brain rewards task completion with small bursts of dopamine. Checking boxes feels good. But emotional connection releases deeper, longer-lasting chemicals like oxytocin. When you replace connection with constant tasks, you stay stimulated but unsatisfied. In other words, you're busy but not fulfilled. That night, I practiced a different sentence out loud. Slowly. Quietly. With an accent I was still learning to accept. I'm not busy. I'm just scared. It wasn't perfect English. But it was honest. And for the first time since arriving in America, honesty felt lighter than busyness. This story begins there. With two simple words that almost controlled my life. With a culture that values movement over stillness. With a learner who wanted to speak English fluently, but first had to learn how to stop hiding behind, "I'm busy." Because sometimes, the real question isn't how busy you are. It's what you're avoiding when you say it. America looked easy from afar. From a distance, America looks simple. Bright cities. Wide roads. Clean houses with green lawns. From where I stood before moving, the country felt like a smooth movie scene where effort always led to success. I believed that once I landed, life would begin to flow naturally. Work hard, speak English, be fine. But distance edits reality. It removes the cold, the silence, and the small daily shocks that slowly change how you see yourself. The first surprise was the climate. I had read about 4 seasons, but reading and living are very different experiences. Summer felt intense, almost aggressive, with heat pressing down on everything. Then fall arrived quickly, and the air sharpened overnight. Winter came without apology. Long stretches of gray sky. Short days that ended before I felt awake. In many parts of the U.S., climate shapes behavior. People drive instead of walking. They stay indoors. Conversations become efficient, shorter, more purposeful. For someone new, this can feel like emotional distance, even when it isn't meant that way. Cultural differences showed up immediately in small interactions. In America, people smile easily, but share slowly. They ask, "How are you?" without expecting a real answer. At first, I answered honestly. I talked about confusion, homesickness, and language stress. The smile stayed, but the energy shifted. I learned quickly that this question was not an invitation. It was a greeting. So I adjusted. I'm good. I'm busy. Short, safe. Acceptable. Psychologists call this cultural script learning. Your brain watches, copies, and adapts to avoid social friction. It's efficient, but it can be lonely. I was learning how to sound American before I understood how to feel okay as myself. English became a performance, not a connection. Everything looked organized on the surface. Systems worked. Schedules mattered. Policies were clear but strict. Miss a deadline and there were consequences. Forget a form and the process stopped. This structure can feel comforting, but it also leaves little room for confusion. Back home, people explain. In America, you're expected to already know. When you don't, shame sneaks in quietly. Language made this worse. My listening improved faster than my speaking. I understood more than I could express. This gap is one of the most frustrating stages of language learning. Studies show it often increases anxiety because you are aware of your mistakes before you can fix them. I knew what I wanted to say. I just couldn't get it out in time. Conversations moved fast. By the time I formed a sentence, the moment had passed. So again, I became busy. I stayed busy learning how things worked. Busy reading signs. Busy translating in my head. Busy replaying conversations I wished I had handled better. To outsiders, I looked focused and hardworking. Inside, I felt behind. America rewards independence, but independence without support can feel like being dropped into deep water and told to swim calmly. The lifestyle was different too. People planned weeks ahead. Spontaneity was rare. Coffee dates were scheduled, not suggested. Even rest was productive. Self-care came with rules, apps, and timers. If you weren't optimizing something, you felt slightly wrong. I started measuring my days by output, not emotion. Did I finish tasks? Did I improve my English? Did I move forward? If the answer was yes, I allowed myself to sleep. But progress without grounding creates exhaustion. Science backs this up. Chronic adaptation stress, common in immigrants, keeps the nervous system in a mild fight or flight state. You're not in danger, but your body thinks you might be. Sleep becomes lighter. Thoughts become repetitive. Motivation comes and goes. In this state, learning a language becomes harder, not easier. Yet I blamed myself. I told myself I wasn't trying hard enough. America from afar promised clarity. America up close demanded constant adjustment. Even humor felt different. Jokes relied on references I didn't share. Sarcasm moved faster than my comprehension. Laughter arrived late, if at all. Each missed joke was small, but they added up, like tiny reminders that I was still outside the circle. I remember standing in a grocery store aisle, staring at dozens of cereal boxes. So many choices. So many labels. Low sugar. High protein. Gluten-free. My brain froze. This moment sounds silly, but it captured something important. America offers abundance, but abundance requires decision-making. Decision-making in a second language costs mental energy. By the time I got home, I felt tired without having done anything meaningful. That's when the fantasy cracked. America wasn't easy. It was precise. It worked well for those who already understood its rhythm. For everyone else, it demanded patience and humility. The gap between expectation and reality created quiet disappointment. Not dramatic enough to talk about, just heavy enough to carry daily. Looking back, this was the stage where many learners quit. Not because they lacked ability, but because the environment drained them slowly. Motivation didn't disappear in one moment. It leaked out through weather, silence, and the constant pressure to be okay. And still, I told people I was busy. Because admitting confusion felt worse than admitting exhaustion. Because from afar, America looked easy. And I was afraid to admit that I was struggling inside something everyone else seemed to handle just fine. Why Americans always say busy. If you listen closely in America, you'll hear the word busy everywhere. It floats through hallways, coffee shops, text messages, and elevators like background noise. How are you? Busy. Want to hang out? I'm busy. Sorry for the late reply, busy week. At first, I thought this meant people were overwhelmed. Later, I realized something deeper was happening. Busy wasn't just a description. It was a social language. In the US, being busy signals value. It suggests you are needed, productive, and moving forward. Economists and sociologists often describe American culture as achievement-oriented. Time is treated like currency. If you spend it, it should produce something visible. So when Americans say, I'm busy, they are often saying, I matter, without sounding arrogant. It's a humble way to prove worth. I noticed this pattern at work first. Meetings began with apologies for being busy. Emails ended with gratitude for your time. Time wasn't neutral, it was precious. And the more precious it sounded, the more important you appeared. Saying you had free time felt risky, like admitting you were underused. So people filled silence with schedules. There's also a psychological reason behind this habit. Research on social anxiety shows that people often use busyness as a boundary. It protects them from emotional exposure. If you're busy, you don't have to explain why you don't want to talk. You don't have to say no directly. I'm busy softens rejection. It keeps relationships polite and distant at the same time. I learned this quickly, and I learned it well. When I didn't understand a joke, I smiled and said I was busy. When I felt lonely, I said I was busy. When my English failed me mid-sentence, I laughed and said, sorry, busy brain. People nodded. They understood. Or at least, they accepted it. Busyness created safety. No one asked follow-up questions. But something strange happened. The more I used this word, the less real my connections felt. Conversations stayed on the surface. Relationships remained functional, not intimate. That's when I started observing more carefully. Americans are friendly, but they respect boundaries deeply. Oversharing early can feel uncomfortable. So busyness becomes a socially approved wall. It's not coldness. It's caution. In many cultures, emotional closeness builds quickly. In the US, it builds through consistency over time. Showing up repeatedly matters more than opening up immediately. This explains why let's hang out sometime often means nothing specific. It's not a lie. It's a placeholder. A way to express goodwill without commitment. If you want something real, you need to schedule it. And if you don't, you stay busy. Neuroscience adds another layer. The human brain prefers predictability. Emotional conversations are unpredictable. Tasks are not. When you say you're busy, your brain relaxes slightly because it knows what to do next. Answer emails. Finish work. Move on. Emotions, on the other hand, demand processing. They slow you down. In a culture that moves fast, slowing down feels dangerous. I started to notice how this affected language learning. Real English lives in unscripted moments, small talk, disagreement, humor, vulnerability. But if everyone is busy, those moments shrink. You practice English in structured environments, but you miss the messy, human parts where fluency truly grows. One afternoon, a neighbor asked how I was settling in. I started to answer honestly. I talked about missing home, about the weather, about how hard English still felt. Halfway through, I saw discomfort flicker across their face. Not judgment, just surprise. I adjusted instantly. But yeah, I said quickly, just busy. Relief returned. The conversation ended kindly. That moment taught me something important. In America, emotions are often private. Busyness keeps them contained. This isn't wrong. It's cultural. But for someone trying to learn English through real life, it creates a paradox. You need connection to improve, but connection requires vulnerability. Vulnerability disrupts the rhythm of busyness. Studies on language immersion show that learners progress faster when they feel emotionally safe. Safety encourages risk-taking. Risk-taking leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to growth. But busyness reduces risk. It keeps interactions efficient, not exploratory. So you stay correct, but not fluent. I realized Americans weren't lying when they said they were busy. Many truly were. Long commutes, multiple jobs, family responsibilities. But the word also carried symbolic weight. It was a shield, a signal, and sometimes an excuse. And I was using it the same way. There was also pride involved. Being busy made me feel less like an outsider. I sounded American when I said it. The word fit my mouth easily. 2 syllables. Clear stress. No grammar risk. Saying I'm busy felt like success. But it was a shallow success. The deeper truth was uncomfortable. By copying this habit, I was protecting myself from rejection, but also from connection. I was learning the surface of American English while avoiding its emotional core. I was busy surviving, not living. Understanding this didn't change me overnight. Habits don't disappear just because you name them. But awareness cracked something open. I started hearing the word differently. Every "I'm busy" sounded like a question. Busy with what? Busy from what? And slowly, I began to wonder whether Americans were always busy, or whether many of us were simply avoiding the quiet moments where real language and real life begin. Language shock and silent fear. Imagine opening your mouth to speak and realizing your thoughts are running faster than your words can walk. That was my daily experience in the early months. My brain was full, loud, and emotional, but when it came time to speak English, everything slowed down. Sounds tangled. Grammar collapsed. Confidence vanished. This is what language shock feels like, not confusion, but paralysis. People often talk about culture shock, but language shock is quieter and more personal. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in during small moments. Ordering food, making a phone call, answering a simple question like, "So, what do you do?" In those moments, my chest tightened. My mind searched for safe vocabulary. And when it couldn't find any, it reached for the easiest exit, silence. Or, "I'm busy." Silent fear became my routine companion. I feared being misunderstood. I feared slowing people down. I feared that my accent would expose me. as less capable, less intelligent, less something. None of this was true, but fear doesn't need truth. It only needs uncertainty. And speaking a new language is uncertainty in its purest form. Science explains this reaction well. When you speak a foreign language, your brain uses more cognitive resources. You're translating, monitoring grammar, adjusting pronunciation, and reading social cues all at once. This overload activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center. When the amygdala takes over, fluency drops. You forget words you know. Your voice changes. Your mind goes blank. The fear creates the failure it's afraid of. This happened to me constantly. I remember a moment at work when someone asked for my opinion in a meeting. I had thoughts. Good ones. I had prepared. But when all eyes turned toward me, my English disappeared. I smiled, nodded, and said, "I'll follow up later. I'm a bit busy right now." That sentence saved me socially, but it cost me internally. Every avoided sentence reinforced a belief: it's safer not to speak. Over time, my silence became strategic. I listened carefully. I observed patterns. I understood far more than people realized. But understanding without responding builds pressure. It's like holding your breath emotionally. Eventually, something has to give. Language learners often experience what psychologists call communication apprehension. It's the fear associated with real or anticipated communication. The irony is that the more you avoid speaking, the stronger the fear becomes. Avoidance trains the brain to believe speaking is dangerous. Silence feels like relief, but it's temporary relief. Long term, it shrinks your world. I started noticing how Americans handled silence. They filled it quickly. With jokes. With updates. With busyness. Silence made people uncomfortable. That meant if I stayed quiet, someone else would speak. I could disappear without being rude. This made avoidance even easier. But disappearance has consequences. My English plateaued. My confidence dropped. I felt invisible and overexposed at the same time. Invisible because I wasn't fully participating. Exposed because I was constantly aware of my limitations. This contradiction drained me. Climate added another layer. Cold weather pushed social life indoors. Fewer casual conversations. Less spontaneous practice. When interactions did happen, they felt higher stakes. There were fewer chances to warm up. Every conversation felt like a test. Fear thrives in test environments. At home, I replayed conversations obsessively. I corrected sentences hours too late. I practiced replies to questions that had already passed. This mental rehearsal is common among language learners. It's the brain's attempt to regain control. But it also keeps you trapped in the past instead of present in the moment. One night, I noticed something important. I was speaking more English in my head than in real life. Perfect English. Confident English. English without interruption or judgment. My fear wasn't about language ability. It was about exposure. That realization hurt, because it meant I wasn't failing due to lack of skill. I was failing because I was protecting myself too much. Research on second language acquisition shows that emotional safety is as important as vocabulary. When learners feel judged, progress slows. When they feel accepted, mistakes increase, and so does fluency. Mistakes are not a sign of failure. They are evidence of engagement. I knew this intellectually, but emotionally, fear still ruled. The phrase, "I'm busy," returned again and again. It became my emergency brake. Whenever a conversation threatened to go deeper or longer, I pulled it. Busy meant exit. Busy meant control. Busy meant I didn't have to confront my fear of sounding foolish. But each time I used it, something inside me shrank. I wasn't just avoiding English. I was avoiding myself in English. The version of me that hesitated, stumbled, searched for words. The version that sounded different. I wanted to skip that version and arrive directly at fluency. But language doesn't work that way. You have to pass through the uncomfortable stage. You have to let yourself be slow. The silent fear didn't disappear suddenly. It softened gradually, like ice melting unnoticed. The first step wasn't speaking better. It was allowing silence without running from it. Sitting with the discomfort. Letting my accent exist in the room. That's when I understood something crucial. Language shock isn't about language at all. It's about identity. About who you are when you can't fully express yourself yet. And until you accept that version of yourself, "I'm busy," will always be waiting, ready to protect you, and quietly, patiently, keep you stuck. Cold weather, colder loneliness. There is a particular kind of loneliness that only appears when the weather changes before you are ready. Not dramatic loneliness. Not the kind that makes you cry in public. It's quieter. It shows up when the sky turns gray at 4 in the afternoon and your body still expects sunlight. When your phone stays silent, not because people don't care, but because everyone is inside, busy surviving winter in their own way. My first real American winter taught me this loneliness. Back home, weather was something you lived with, not something that controlled you. In many parts of the U.S., especially colder regions, climate shapes daily life. Winter reorganizes everything. Social plans shrink. Outdoor conversations disappear. People move from cars to buildings with minimal contact in between. Life becomes efficient and contained. For someone learning English, this matters more than you'd expect. Casual interactions are where language grows naturally. Small talk while walking. Accidental conversations. Friendly comments about the weather itself. When cold removes these moments, practice becomes intentional instead of organic. And intentional practice feels heavier. It feels like work. I noticed how quickly my world narrowed. Wake up in the dark. Commute in silence. Work indoors. Return home when it was all ready. Night again. Days blurred together. Without sunlight, my motivation dropped, even though my responsibilities didn't. Science explains this clearly. Reduced exposure to natural light affects serotonin and melatonin levels, increasing fatigue and lowering mood. Seasonal changes can intensify feelings of isolation, especially for people already under stress. Language learning is stress. Loneliness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it disguises itself as productivity. I filled evenings with tasks, studying vocabulary, watching videos, cleaning, planning, anything to avoid the quiet. When someone asked how I was doing, I gave the familiar answer. Busy. It sounded strong. It sounded controlled. Inside, it felt cold. American culture values personal space, especially in winter. People retreat respectfully. This isn't rejection. It's rhythm. But when you're new, Rhythm feels like exclusion. Invitations slow down. Conversations become shorter. Everyone seems to have somewhere else to be, even if that place is just home. I remember one evening walking past houses with lights on, curtains drawn, warmth inside, invisible from the street. I realized how little of people's lives I actually saw. In warmer seasons, life spills outward. In winter, it folds inward. For someone without deep roots yet, there's nowhere to fold into. This is where loneliness deepened. Studies on immigrant adjustment show that social isolation often peaks during the first winter. Not because people are less friendly, but because opportunities to connect decrease. Combine that with language barriers, and isolation becomes self-reinforcing. You speak less. You reach out less. You assume others are busy. I did exactly that. I stopped initiating conversations unless necessary. I didn't want to interrupt anyone's routine. I told myself people needed space. This was partly true, but it was also an excuse. Rejection hurts less when you never try. English practice suffered quietly. Listening improved because I consumed content alone. Reading improved because books don't judge. Speaking, however, stayed limited. There was no urgency to speak when no one was around to listen. Language without people becomes theoretical, accurate, but lifeless. The cold also amplified memories. Familiar smells. Familiar sounds. The way conversations used to flow easily in my native language. Nostalgia intensified in winter, and nostalgia rarely motivates action. It makes you look backward. One night, I realized I had gone an entire weekend without speaking out loud. Not just English. Any language. That moment scared me more than grammar mistakes ever had. Humans regulate emotions through interaction. Without it, thoughts echo. Doubts grow louder. Neuroscience shows that social connection regulates the nervous system. Warm interactions lower cortisol, the stress hormone. Without them, the body stays tense. In that state, learning slows. Creativity drops. Everything feels harder than it should. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't failing. I was cold physically and emotionally. And yet, on the surface, I looked fine. I showed up. I completed tasks. I answered messages politely. Busyness hid loneliness effectively. No one worries about someone who is busy. But loneliness doesn't disappear when ignored. It adapts. I began to associate English with effort and isolation. Not intentionally, but emotionally. English became the language of forms, instructions, and solitude. Not laughter. Not warmth. This association made motivation fragile. Every time I tried to practice speaking, my body resisted. Not because English was hard, but because English felt lonely. The shift began slowly. Not by forcing myself to be social, but by naming what I felt. Cold weather didn't just change temperature. It changed access. Access to people. To light. To casual connection. Understanding this reduced self-blame. I started doing small things. Saying a few words to a cashier instead of staying silent. Commenting on the weather, even if it felt obvious. Accepting that awkwardness was part of winter too. These interactions didn't solve loneliness, but they softened it. The most important realization came quietly. Loneliness wasn't proof that I didn't belong. It was evidence that I needed Connection in a place that required patience to access. Winter passed eventually. The days grew longer. People re-emerged. But the lesson stayed. Climate doesn't just shape landscapes. It shapes language opportunities, emotional states, and the stories you tell yourself about why you're struggling. I stopped saying, "I'm busy," automatically. Sometimes I started saying something else. "I'm still adjusting." That sentence felt warmer already. Love spoke faster than English. Love does not wait for perfect grammar. It doesn't pause while you search for the right tense or the correct preposition. Love moves first. And language runs after it, slightly out of breath. That was the surprise I never planned for in America. In a country where my English felt slow and careful, love arrived quickly and spoke in a voice I somehow understood. I met them in an ordinary way. No dramatic setting. No movie-style coincidence. Just a shared space, a simple conversation, and a moment where eye contact lasted a second. Longer than expected. At first, I relied on safe English. Short sentences. Polite smiles. Familiar phrases. I thought attraction required fluency. I was wrong. What connected us wasn't vocabulary. It was attention. I listened carefully, not just to words, but to tone and rhythm. I noticed pauses, laughter, the way expressions changed. This kind of listening didn't feel like studying. It felt natural. When you care about someone, your brain focuses differently. Neuroscience shows that emotional engagement increases attention and memory. In simple terms, love makes your brain work harder without feeling tired. My English improved around them, not because I knew more words, but because I wanted to be understood. Still, fear followed closely. Romantic conversations carry risk. Even in your native language. In English, the risk doubled. I worried about sounding childish. I worried about missing jokes. I worried about misunderstanding feelings. Sometimes, when emotions became too complex, I escaped into my favorite phrase. "Sorry, I've been busy." But something interesting happened. Busy didn't work here. When someone cares, "I'm busy" sounds thin. It creates distance where closeness is expected. The first time I used it in this context, I saw disappointment flash briefly across their face. Not anger. Just confusion. That moment forced me to confront something I had been avoiding. If I wanted real connection, I couldn't hide behind efficiency. So I tried something new. I spoke slowly. I allowed silence. I admitted confusion instead of covering it. "I don't know how to say this well," I said once. "But I feel it." That sentence wasn't perfect English. But it was honest. And honesty translated perfectly. Love created a new learning environment. Mistakes were corrected gently, sometimes playfully. Pronunciation became shared humor. Grammar slipped into daily life without pressure. Studies on language learning confirm this effect. When learners feel emotionally supported, anxiety decreases and fluency increases. The brain releases dopamine during positive interactions, reinforcing learning pathways. In other words, love made English safer. Cultural differences still mattered. In American dating culture, directness is often valued. Feelings are named sooner. Boundaries are discussed explicitly. This clarity was refreshing but intimidating. In my culture, emotions often live between lines. Here, they stood in the open. What are we wasn't a dramatic question. It was practical. Answering it required English I wasn't fully confident in yet. I remember rehearsing conversations in my head before seeing them, practicing sentences about feelings like they were presentations. But once we talked, the words didn't always match the script. Emotion changed direction. I stumbled. I corrected myself mid-sentence. And still, the conversation worked. Because love is patient with accents. There were misunderstandings. Some funny. Some painful. Jokes that landed wrong. Serious moments softened accidentally by awkward phrasing. But each misunderstanding became a lesson. Not just about language, but about how Americans express care. Verbal affirmation mattered more than I expected. Saying, I appreciate you or I need you wasn't dramatic. It was normal. This challenged me. Saying emotions out loud felt exposed. Vulnerable. But avoiding them created distance. Slowly, I learned that in this culture, silence can be misread. Where I came from, silence often meant respect or depth. Here, silence sometimes meant disinterest. To love someone in America, I had to speak, even imperfectly. I noticed how my fear of speaking decreased in these moments. The stakes were high emotionally, but lower linguistically. If I made a mistake, it didn't define my intelligence. It just made me human. That realization spilled into other areas of life. If my accent was acceptable in love, why was I so afraid of it everywhere else? Language learning shifted from obligation to desire. Busy lost its power. I couldn't say I'm busy when what I meant was I miss you. I couldn't hide behind schedules when feelings needed attention. Love demanded presence, not productivity. And presence required language. Over time, English stopped feeling like a wall between us. It became a bridge. Not a perfect bridge. Sometimes shaky, sometimes narrow, but strong enough to hold real emotion. Looking back, love didn't fix my English. It reframed it. English was no longer just a skill to master. It was a tool to connect, to apologize, to comfort, to dream out loud. That's when I understood something essential. Fluency doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with care. When you care enough, you speak anyway. And when you speak anyway, fear loses its grip. Love didn't wait for my English to catch up. And, because of that, my English finally started moving faster. Marriage under cultural pressure. Marriage doesn't begin with a ceremony. It begins when daily life stops being romantic and starts being real. In America, that moment arrived faster than I expected. Love had softened my fear of English, but marriage introduced a different challenge, culture. Not the visible kind, like food or holidays, but the invisible rules about responsibility, communication, and emotional labor. In the U.S., marriage is often treated like a partnership between two independent systems. Two adults, two careers, two schedules. One shared calendar. Equality is valued, but equality here means something specific. It means speaking up. It means negotiating. It means explaining your needs clearly and early. Silence is rarely interpreted as patience. More often, it's interpreted as disengagement. That was hard for me. I came from a background where love often meant endurance. You showed care by staying, not by explaining. Problems were softened by time, not dissected by words. In marriage, I carried this instinct with me. When something felt wrong, I worked harder. I stayed busy. I told myself things would settle. They didn't. American marriage culture expects verbal clarity. What do you need from me is not a dramatic question here. It's a practical one. When I didn't answer clearly, tension grew. Not because of lack of love, but because of lack of information. My partner wasn't angry. They were confused. English suddenly mattered more than ever. Arguments don't wait for fluency. They arrive when emotions are high and vocabulary feels low. In those moments, my brain defaulted to efficiency. Short answers. Neutral tone. And again, my old shield appeared. I'm busy. Let's talk later. Later often meant never. Psychologists describe this pattern as emotional withdrawal. It's a common response when someone feels overwhelmed or under-resourced. For immigrants, language limitation increases this tendency. You're not avoiding the issue itself. You're avoiding the risk of expressing it poorly. But in marriage, avoidance feels personal. I noticed how small misunderstandings stacked up. Not dramatic fights. Just unresolved moments. Expectations left unspoken. Assumptions left unchallenged. Over time, the emotional distance grew quietly. On the surface, life looked stable. Bills paid. Schedules managed. From the outside, we looked busy and functional. Inside, something fragile was forming. American policies and systems also influenced our marriage. Work schedules were demanding. Time off was limited. There was less space for recovery after stress. In many countries, family absorbs pressure. In the U.S., couples often absorb it alone. This intensifies the need for communication. You can't rely on extended support if you don't ask for it explicitly. I didn't know how to ask. Language learning research highlights that emotional topics require a higher level of proficiency than daily tasks. Talking about groceries is easy. Talking about unmet needs is not. I often felt like a child in adult conversations, understanding the seriousness, but lacking the tools to participate fully. One evening stands out clearly. We sat at the table after a long day. Silence stretched. I felt something needed to be said, but my English felt heavy. My partner finally spoke. Calmly. Clearly. They explained feeling alone, even though we lived together. That sentence hit harder than any argument. I wanted to respond deeply. To explain my fear, my confusion, my constant effort. Instead, I said something shallow. Something safe. I said I was busy. Busy with work. Busy with stress. Busy adjusting. It was true. And it was incomplete. That night, I realized something uncomfortable. Busyness had followed me into marriage. What once protected me socially was now damaging something intimate. Being busy meant being unavailable. And marriage requires availability, not just presence. Science supports this. Emotional availability strengthens attachment bonds. When partners feel heard and understood, stress decreases and cooperation increases. Language is not just a tool for information. It's a tool for regulation. Without it, tension accumulates. The shift didn't happen through one perfect conversation. It happened through many imperfect ones. I started preparing emotionally, not linguistically. Instead of planning perfect sentences, I focused on naming one feeling at a time. I feel overwhelmed. I feel scared. Simple sentences. Clear emotions. American culture rewarded this honesty. My partner responded with patience, not correction. We learned each other's emotional languages alongside spoken English. Sometimes I asked for time to find words. Sometimes we paused. Silence became a shared space, not an escape. Marriage forced me to confront a truth I had avoided. Language learning isn't separate from life. It is life. You don't learn English first and then use it for relationships. You learn it inside relationships, under pressure, with stakes. Cultural pressure didn't disappear. We still misunderstood each other sometimes. But understanding became the goal, not winning. I stopped hiding behind being busy. I started showing up slowly. Imperfectly, but honestly. Marriage in America didn't break me. It taught me that love without language can survive, but love with language can grow. And growth, I learned, always sounds a little awkward at first. Busy as an emotional escape. At some point, I'm busy stopped sounding like a schedule update and started sounding like a confession. Not a loud one. A quiet, almost polite confession. That said, I don't know how to deal with this right now. I didn't notice the shift immediately. The phrase had been protecting me for so long that I mistook it for truth. But marriage has a way of holding up a mirror you can't look away from. I began to hear myself more clearly. When conflict approached, my body reacted before my mind did. Shoulders tightened. Breath shortened. My thoughts rushed forward, searching for an exit. And there it was, ready as always. Busy. 2 syllables that promised relief. Busy meant postponement. Postponement felt like control. Psychologists call this emotional avoidance. It's not laziness. It's a defense mechanism. When emotions feel too complex or threatening, the brain seeks distraction. Tasks feel safer than feelings. Action feels safer than vulnerability. In American culture, this defense is socially rewarded. Productivity is praised. Endurance is admired. So emotional avoidance hides in plain sight. Disguised as responsibility. I used responsibility well. When my partner wanted to talk about unmet needs, I offered solutions instead of empathy. When sadness entered the room, I cleaned, organized, planned. I stayed busy. I told myself I was being helpful. In reality, I was keeping distance. Neuroscience explains why this works, at least temporarily. Completing tasks releases dopamine, a reward chemical. It gives a sense of accomplishment. Emotional conversations, however, activate uncertainty. They don't promise closure. For a brain already working in a second language, uncertainty feels exhausting. Avoidance becomes logical. But logical doesn't mean healthy. The more I escaped into busyness, the less available I became. My partner felt it. Conversations shortened. Emotional bids went unanswered. Not intentionally, just efficiently. Over time, efficiency drained warmth from our connection. We were functioning, not relating. One evening, my partner said something that cut through my defenses. "You're always here," they said, "but you're rarely with me." That sentence stayed in the air long after it was spoken. I wanted to argue, to explain, to list everything I was doing for us. But something stopped me. I realized I had been confusing effort with presence. Effort is visible. Presence is felt. English had taught me how to show effort. Marriage demanded presence. Language played a subtle role in this pattern. Expressing complex emotions in English still required energy. Choosing the right words. Managing tone. Avoiding misunderstanding. Busyness offered an easier path. It allowed me to stay active without being exposed. Research on second language emotional expression shows that people often feel less emotionally fluent in a new language. Feelings feel smaller or harder to access. This can lead to emotional distancing, not because feelings are absent, but because they are harder to translate. I wasn't avoiding emotion itself. I was avoiding translation failure. But avoidance has a cost. Each time I delayed a conversation, tension didn't disappear. It settled deeper. The nervous system remembers unresolved stress. Over time, this can lead to emotional numbness or sudden outbursts. Neither builds trust. The shift began when I stopped asking, "What should I say?" and started asking, "What am I feeling?" Naming feelings internally simplified expression. Instead of explaining everything, I learned to offer one clear sentence. I feel overwhelmed. I feel scared of saying this. Wrong. I need time, but I don't want to avoid you. Those sentences were not elegant, but they were honest. And honesty reduced fear. My partner responded differently when I named emotion instead of hiding behind tasks. The room softened. Pace slowed. Busyness lost its urgency. We weren't solving problems immediately. We were sharing weight. This change spilled into my English learning. I noticed my speaking became less rehearsed. I paused without panic. I asked for clarification without shame. Emotional safety increased linguistic risk-taking. Risk-taking increased fluency. Science confirms this loop. When emotional threat decreases, the brain's language centers function more effectively. Stress blocks access to vocabulary. Safety restores it. By choosing presence over busyness, I wasn't just saving my marriage. I was unblocking my English. I started noticing how often others used busy as an emotional shield too. Friends canceled plans politely. Coworkers avoided difficult conversations. No one was lying. We were all protecting something. Understanding this made me less judgmental and more intentional. I began to respond differently. When someone said they were busy, I didn't push. But when I felt myself wanting to say it, I paused. I checked in with my body. Was I truly occupied, or was I uncomfortable? Sometimes I was genuinely busy. Other times, I was avoiding a feeling I didn't know how to express yet. Choosing not to escape didn't mean forcing myself into every conversation. It meant being honest about my limits. I need a moment to think. I'm tired, but I want to talk tomorrow. These alternatives felt risky at first, but they built trust. Busy lost its power when I stopped using it as a hiding place. It became just a word again. And in that space, something new appeared. Emotional presence. Slower conversations. English spoken with less fear. Life felt heavier sometimes, but also more real. I learned that avoidance doesn't disappear when life gets easier. It disappears when you decide to stay. Learning English through daily pain. There is a moment in every long struggle when motivation stops responding to inspiration. Quotes don't work. Advice sounds hollow. Even success stories feel distant. That moment arrived for me quietly, somewhere between a tired argument and an unfinished sentence. I realized I couldn't rely on motivation anymore. If I wanted to learn English, I had to attach it to something stronger than hope. I had to attach it to pain. Not dramatic pain. Daily pain. The kind that shows up when you misunderstand your partner and hurt them without meaning to. The kind that appears when you want to explain yourself, but your words arrive late and clumsy. The kind that makes you feel small, not because you are weak, but because you are limited by language in moments that matter. That pain became my teacher. I stopped treating English as a subject and started treating it as a survival skill. Not survival in the extreme sense, but emotional survival. I needed English to repair moments, not just to pass conversations. That shift changed everything. Instead of studying random vocabulary, I paid attention to the sentences I failed to say. After arguments, I wrote down what I wanted to say, not what I should say. Simple sentences. Real ones. I didn't mean to ignore you. I was overwhelmed, not uncaring. I need help, but I don't know how to ask. These were not textbook examples. They were emotional necessities. Research in language acquisition shows that emotionally relevant input is remembered more effectively. The brain prioritizes information linked to strong feelings. Pain sharpens memory. Every sentence connected to a real emotional moment stayed with me longer than any word list ever had. I practiced English at the worst times, not the best. After difficult conversations. During uncomfortable silences. When my instinct was to withdraw. Instead of escaping, I slowed down and tried to speak anyway. Badly. Imperfectly. But honestly. This was hard. There were days when I felt exhausted before I even opened my mouth. English required courage I didn't always have. On those days, progress looked small. One sentence spoken instead of none. One clarification requested instead of a silent nod. These actions didn't feel impressive, but they accumulated. I also changed how I listened. Instead of trying to understand everything, I focused on emotional cues. Tone. Speed. Emphasis. American English carries emotion through rhythm as much as vocabulary. I learned that I'm fine could mean many things depending on how it was said. This awareness improved my responses, even when my words were limited. Daily life became my curriculum. At home, I practiced explaining feelings out loud, even when alone. Not rehearsing perfection, but rehearsing presence. I allowed myself to sound slow, to pause, to search. Neuroscience supports this approach. Speaking aloud, even imperfectly, strengthens neural pathways more effectively than silent rehearsal. The mouth teaches the brain. I also learned to forgive my English faster. Mistakes stopped being evidence of failure and became signals of effort. When I said something wrong and saw confusion, I didn't collapse inward. I corrected myself. Or I tried again differently. Repair became part of communication, not proof that communication had failed. This mindset affected my relationship deeply. My partner noticed the change. Not because my English suddenly improved, but because my willingness increased. I stayed in conversations longer. I didn't disappear into busyness. I showed up with limited tools, but full intent. Pain didn't disappear, but it transformed. instead of pain caused by avoidance. I felt pain from effort. That pain felt cleaner. It led somewhere. Psychologists distinguish between avoidant pain and growth pain. Avoidant pain repeats itself. Growth pain evolves. I was finally experiencing the second kind. I stopped asking myself, am I fluent yet? And started asking, did I show up today? Showing up meant trying to say one true thing. It meant listening. Without planning an escape. It meant letting English exist in real life, not just in my head. Over time, something surprising happened. The pain softened. Not because life became easier, but because I became more capable. My sentences grew longer. My pauses grew calmer. My fear shrank to a manageable size. English didn't become comfortable overnight, but it became familiar. Familiarity reduces threat. When the brain no longer perceives language as danger, fluency follows naturally. Learning English through daily pain wasn't efficient. It wasn't neat. It wasn't inspirational. But it was real. And real learning doesn't come from comfort. It comes from staying present when leaving would be easier. Children, family, and real motivation. Real motivation doesn't arrive as a sudden burst of energy. It arrives quietly, disguised as responsibility. It shows up when someone else depends on you, not when you feel ready. For me, that moment came through family, through children who listened more than I realized, and watched even when I thought they weren't paying attention. Children don't care about your accent. They care about your presence. When our children entered my life, English changed its role immediately. It was no longer just about expressing feelings or repairing adult misunderstandings. It became the language of bedtime routines, school notes, doctor visits, and small everyday questions that carried big emotional weight. Are you okay? What happened today? Can you help me? These questions didn't wait for confidence. They demanded response. At first, I relied on my partner for support. They translated when I struggled. They stepped in when conversations moved too fast. This help was necessary, but it also reminded me of something uncomfortable. If I stayed silent too long, my relationship with my children would pass through someone else's language. That thought became my strongest motivation. Research on family language dynamics shows that parents' active use of the community language strengthens emotional bonding and children's sense of security. Language isn't just information. It's reassurance. It's how care travels. I wanted my children to feel that care directly from me, not filtered. Daily life with children is repetitive, and repetition is a gift to language learners. The same phrases return again and again. Put on your shoes. Did you finish your homework? Time to go. These sentences anchored my English in routine. Unlike emotional conversations, they came without pressure. I could practice without fear. But family also brings unexpected emotional moments. A child crying because of a bad day at school. A question about fairness. A quiet confession before sleep. In those moments, perfect English didn't matter. Presence did. I learned to simplify without becoming distant. Short sentences. Warm tone. Eye contact. Communication is more than words. Science supports this. Emotional attunement, responding to feelings rather than content, builds trust. Even limited language can convey safety if tone and timing are right. I leaned into this. When vocabulary failed, I used closeness. When grammar collapsed, I used consistency. Children also reflect your behavior back to you. I noticed how they handled difficulty. They tried. They failed. They tried again without shame. No one expects a child to speak perfectly. That grace extended to me, if I allowed it. Family routines pushed my English into new territory. School emails, medical forms, conversations with teachers. These interactions were stressful, but they were also purposeful. The stakes were clear. I wasn't practicing for myself anymore. I was practicing for someone else. Motivation rooted in care is more stable than motivation rooted in self-improvement. I stopped asking whether I felt like practicing English. I practiced because life required it. This removed the emotional debate. English became part of responsibility, like showing up on time or keeping promises. Cultural differences appeared again. American parenting culture encourages verbal affirmation. Parents talk through emotions. They label feelings. I see you're frustrated. That sounds disappointing. This explicit emotional language was new to me. Learning it expanded my emotional vocabulary alongside my linguistic one. Marriage and family became my living classroom. Mistakes happened in real time. Sometimes children corrected me without meaning to. Sometimes they laughed. Their feedback was immediate and honest. Over time, my confidence grew not from praise, but from familiarity. I noticed my English changing in subtle ways. I spoke more spontaneously. I worried less about sounding wrong. I used the same phrases repeatedly until they became automatic. Automatic language frees mental space. When you don't have to think about structure, you can focus on connection. Family life also limited my escape routes. There was no "I'm busy" when a child needed attention. No postponing emotions when someone was upset. Presence was non-negotiable. This forced my language to grow under pressure, but also under warmth. One evening, a child asked me to explain something difficult. I struggled. I searched for words. I simplified. I tried again. When I finally finished, they nodded and said, "I get it." That moment felt larger than fluency. It felt like belonging. English became woven into family memory. Shared jokes. Shared frustrations. Shared routines. Language stopped being a separate project and became part of our story. That's when I understood something important. Motivation doesn't come from wanting to improve yourself. It comes from wanting to be there for others. And when English became the way I showed up for my family, I stopped asking whether I was ready. I just spoke. Choosing presence over busyness. Presence is not something you schedule. You don't add it to a calendar or check it off a list. Presence is what happens when you stop running long enough to stay. For a long time, I believed being busy meant being responsible. In America, busyness looked like adulthood. But somewhere between family life and emotional exhaustion, I realized I was confusing motion with meaning. I had learned how to stay busy very well. My days were full. Work, family tasks, English practice, responsibilities layered on top of each other. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. Inside, I felt scattered. Busy kept me moving, but it also kept me shallow. I was present physically, but emotionally divided. Choosing presence meant slowing down in a culture that rewards speed. American life often celebrates efficiency. Quick replies, clear plans, optimized routines. These systems work, but they also train the brain to value output over awareness. When something uncomfortable arises, the instinct is to fix it or move past it. Presence asks you to do the opposite. To pause. To notice. To stay with uncertainty. This was especially hard in English. Speaking a second language already slows you down. Choosing presence slowed me down further. It meant allowing pauses without apologizing. It meant admitting when I didn't have the right words yet. It meant staying in conversations even when my instinct was to escape into productivity. Psychology calls this emotional regulation through attention. When you focus on the present moment instead of avoiding it, your nervous system calms. Language improves when the body feels safe. Presence isn't passive. It's active attention. I started practicing presence in small ways. When someone spoke, I listened without planning my reply. When I felt confused, I asked for repetition instead of pretending to understand. When emotions rose, I named them simply. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Not as an explanation, but as information. These choices changed my relationships. Conversations became slower, but deeper. Misunderstandings were addressed earlier. Silence became less threatening. In American culture, silence can feel awkward, but it can also signal thoughtfulness. I learned to let silence breathe. Presence also changed how I practiced English. I stopped rehearsing entire conversations in my head. Instead, I trusted myself to respond in the moment. This reduced pressure. Language became reactive instead of scripted. Reactive language is more flexible. It adapts. Neuroscience supports this. Over-planning speech increases cognitive load. When cognitive load is high, fluency drops. Presence lowers load by reducing internal monitoring. You speak more naturally when you stop watching yourself so closely. Choosing presence required me to let go of perfection. Perfection is future-oriented. Presence is now-oriented. When I chased perfect English, I disappeared from the moment. When I accepted imperfect English, I arrived. Family life reinforced this lesson. Children don't wait for your readiness. They need you now. Presence meant putting down the phone, making eye contact, responding fully, even if briefly. These moments didn't require advanced vocabulary. They required attention. Marriage benefited too. When I stayed present during difficult conversations, outcomes changed. Not because I said the right thing, but because I stayed. Emotional safety grew. Trust strengthened. Busyness lost its role as an escape. I noticed a shift in how others responded to me. People slowed down when I did. They clarified. They waited. Presence invited cooperation. It signaled respect. In a strange way, my imperfect English became an asset. It forced conversations to become more human. There were still days when busyness pulled me back. Old habits don't disappear easily, but I became better at noticing the impulse. When I felt the urge to say, "I'm busy," I paused. I asked myself whether I was truly unavailable or just uncomfortable. Sometimes I was genuinely busy. Presence includes honesty about limits. But often I realized I had space. I was just afraid of what might surface if I stayed. Staying changed me. English stopped feeling like a test I had to pass. It became a medium I lived in, not always gracefully, but consistently. Presence transformed learning from performance into participation. This choice also reshaped my sense of identity. I wasn't just an immigrant trying to catch up. I was a person allowed to exist in process, allowed to speak slowly, allowed to learn publicly. Choosing presence didn't make life easier. It made it fuller. And fullness, I learned, doesn't come from doing more. It comes from being where you already are. A happy ending in simple English. A happy ending doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, often without announcement. You look around one ordinary day and realize that something heavy is no longer there. The fear has loosened its grip. The word busy no longer protects you because you no longer need protection in the same way. That is how my story ended. Simply. Slowly. In plain English. By the time I noticed the change, English had stopped feeling like a wall. It felt like a window. Not always clear, sometimes foggy, but open. I could see through it. I could speak through it. I could live through it. I didn't wake up fluent. I woke up present. My English was still simple. My sentences were still short. My grammar was not perfect. But something important had shifted. I no longer measured every word before speaking. I no longer apologized for my accent. I no longer hid behind "I'm busy" when emotions appeared. I had learned that connection does not require advanced vocabulary. It requires honesty. Simple English turned out to be powerful. Clear subjects. Clear feelings. I'm tired. I need help. I don't understand yet. These sentences carried more truth than long explanations ever did. They made room for others to meet me halfway. In American culture, directness is often valued. Simple English fits well here. When I stopped trying to sound impressive, I started sounding real. People responded to that. Conversations felt lighter, less tense, more human. Family life reflected this change first. Our home became calmer, not because problems disappeared, but because they were spoken about sooner. Children learned that communication didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. They learned that trying mattered more than correctness. Marriage deepened in unexpected ways. Vulnerability replaced defensiveness. Instead of hiding behind productivity, I spoke about fear. Instead of silence, I chose presence. English became the bridge, not the barrier. I also noticed something else. When I accepted my English as it was, it improved faster. This is one of learning's quiet paradoxes. Pressure slows growth. Safety accelerates it. When I felt safe speaking, my brain absorbed patterns naturally. Vocabulary stuck. Phrases repeated themselves into fluency. Linguists call this implicit learning. It happens best when anxiety is low and engagement is high. My life had finally created those conditions. The word busy still existed in my vocabulary, but it lost its emotional power. It became a description, not a defense. I could say I'm busy without disappearing. I could also say I have time without fear. This balance felt like freedom. Looking back, I realized that English was never just a language problem. It was an emotional journey. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being judged. Fear of not belonging. Language carried these fears, but it did not create them. When the fears softened, the language followed. My story did not end with perfection. It ended with acceptance. Acceptance of my pace. Acceptance of my voice. Acceptance of my place in between languages, in between cultures. This in-between space became home. If you are listening to this and learning English, I want you to hear something clearly. You do not need to wait until you are fluent to start living in English. You do not need advanced grammar to be present. You do not need perfect pronunciation to be understood. You need courage to stay. Stay in conversations. Stay in moments. Stay with discomfort long enough for it to teach you something. Stay with simple sentences until they become strong. English will grow around your life, not before it. My happy ending is not about mastering English. It is about letting English serve life instead of the other way around. It is about choosing connection over protection, presence over busyness, simplicity over silence. And the ending is happy because it is real. But every real ending is also a beginning. Because now, when I speak English, I am not trying to become someone else. I am simply being myself in simple English. And that is enough. Sometimes, the most dangerous lie is not what others tell you. It's the quiet sentence you repeat to yourself. I'm busy. Busy learning later. Busy loving later. Busy becoming yourself later. But what if busy was never about time? What if it was about fear of sounding wrong, fear of being seen, fear of trying and failing in another language? This story wasn't just about learning English. It was about choosing presence over avoidance, connection over perfection, and simple English over silent regret. If you're listening right now and feeling stuck, tired, or ready to give up on learning English, remember this. You don't need to be fluent to start living. You don't need perfect words to speak a real life. You just need one honest sentence, spoken today. This channel is not about fast results. It's about real English, real stories, and real growth slowly, gently, and sustainably. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more real English story practice, emotional storytelling, and slow, clear English you can actually understand and use. Like the video so YouTube knows this content matters to learners like you. Comment below, do you say I'm busy or are you ready to be present? Because the moment you stop hiding behind busy is the moment English and life finally begins to move with you. That's all for today. I'll make many more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe to watch more.